a flaw. Ooh. Zoom is talking to me. So we approach it from waste is a design flaw. So how, even within the confines of our small classroom or our studio, how can we start to think of waste as a resource? Because if we can start small, that way of thinking can then be adopted and applied on larger and larger scales. So these models are a way for students to test an iterative process, which means rather than thinking, I've got one shot and I've got to make it what I need it to be, we test it, then we share it, receive feedback, and then evolve it, and then evolve it, and then evolve it. And it builds that muscle, that ability to take feedback and continue to do the work in the hopes that every time you're receiving feedback, you're vetting it, and then you're moving towards something that takes in more constraints or criteria into the sort of what you're creating. So we're exploring materiality, efficiencies, and as artists, also how to be expressive. It has to be something that impacts people. And so what is it? Beauty? Is it poetic? Is it something that speaks to your soul? You can't throw that out and just prioritize perhaps efficiency. How do you balance these different needs that the things that we create have to address? So we also talk about process in terms of how we engage other people. It's very easy sometimes to exist within our own sort of, bubble, but as designers, we have to be able to work on teams. We also have to be able to negotiate compromise. We have to resolve conflict. And I think, more than ever today, these skills are so important. And if we can start within the studio and we talk about it in the context of design thinking, you start to realize that what might seem to some as, and I hate the phrase soft skills, truly like being able to negotiate, resolve conflict, address other people's needs, it's very hard work, but it allows you, I think, to move in ways that are more authentic and then hopefully develop ideas that actually help people. So here, this was a charrette. A charrette is a significant amount of work in a short period of time. We were engaging people that live around the intersection of Belvedere, Chamberlain, and Broad Street. And this is the Institute for Contemporary Art here in Richmond. A lot of people have a love-hate relationship. People either love that building or they hate that building. And so the thought was, how do you improve the street presence? Because it's just so crudely kind of placed right there on that corner. It's a very hard corner, the roads and the streetscape there's no shade. It's a tough spot. And so we invited around 50 people. Some of them were employees, the director of the ICA at the time. And then we had folks that came in that we'd invited from the community. And it was a very boisterous conversation. But what you're seeing are, we broke out into small groups and round tables, and then there are different prompts that each table are discussing. And the thought is, we break into groups to discuss thoughts, we bring them back, and then we pin them up, and then we visualize. So it's not enough to just talk about it. It's like we need tangible evidence of what we're thinking. And then at the end of this conversation, so what are the takeaways? What are the next steps? So again, it's a very process-oriented, critique-oriented process. So I lead a studio for VCU called the Middle of Broad Studio. We're always open for First Fridays if you ever want to come check us out, from 6 to 8 on First Fridays. But we are at 205 East Broad Street, hence the Middle of Broad name. But coming back to this idea of circularity, it requires us to challenge existing paradigms to move in that direction. VCU, like a lot of universities, one of the big challenges is that it's a big machine and there's lots of kind of siloing that can happen. And it can become challenging sometimes to collaborate or to, find opportunities to work with people from other disciplines. And so the Middle of Broad Studio is where students can come to take classes, and every team is interdisciplinary. So for example, right now I've got students from sculpture, humanities, health science. We don't have any engineering students at the moment, but sculpture, interior design, fashion design, graphic design. And we have a portal through which community members, especially like small businesses and nonprofits, they can submit to us requests for design assistance. And then our student teams that are interdisciplinary, they work with that client or community partner for the semester to actually develop design strategies to address their issues. What you're seeing here are sketches. So the city of Richmond had a gun buyback program a year and a half ago. And so through that, I can't remember exactly how many guns they reclaimed, but they exceeded the amount that they thought they were going to. So the city was interested in gathering ideas from the community about what that material, which there were a surprising number apparently of 3D printed guns, so plastic, that were returned. But the majority were metal. And so if they were melted down, could they become material for sculpture, public art in some way that could perhaps collective grief, collective hope? Like there could be some way in which this material would become something else that could have a positive impact. So these sketches were by the Mob Studio, our students, and these were the initial ideas. So again, coming back to an iterative process, they start by sketching. What are all the constraints? What are the opportunities that we have? Then they move to modeling and more evolved drawings. We're starting to think about the scale of the idea. So on the left, we have, these are simple chipboard and aluminum foil. And then on the right, these are drawings with notes. They started thinking about what if it was something trellis-like, something you could actually kind of occupy. So these were their final renderings. And it was, again, sort of trellis-like, but the idea was that the metal created a structure that could support plants. It could create a little bit of shade. It felt like something sculptural that you could experience and walk through, and that it could be somewhere in the city, perhaps in a public park, somewhere that's accessible to the public. On the right, they were considering whether or not pieces of metal could become almost like a musical instrument, and so the wind could move through like chimes. But this process of assessing it, talking with people that are involved to gather the constraints and opportunities, and then testing it through iterations and pinups. This took about 2.5 months for them to develop these ideas. And it builds a tolerance for that process. Yeah. So that was the Mob Studio. And now I'm going to shift toward, this is a project that Radhika and I are currently working on. It's called the Material Index Project. So we received a grant last spring. Transdisciplinary Environmental Research Incubator was the sort of umbrella. Through that, there were a number of research projects funded through the university, and they were meant to be interdisciplinary and focused on a number of different subjects that were transdisciplinary in nature and focused on environmental research. So VCU has an entity within the university called the IC, the Institute for Sustainability, Energy, and Environment. And this is a slide that sort of gives you a little bit of insight into what the IC is. It's a way for VCU to have sort of an entity within the university that's dedicated to these types of endeavors, and that's meant to be separate from any particular department or college. And so that way they're not embedded in any of the departments or colleges. They're sort of like an outside entity. And so we're working with them currently on this grant. And so Radhika is representing the School of Engineering or the College of Engineering. There are several of us from VCU Arts. We have another engineering faculty as well. We've got faculty on our team from the College of Humanities and Sciences, and then also the School of Business. So the Material Index Project, we've been working on it for about 1.5 years, or about a year. And these, again, these are some of the departments that have faculty that are participating with us on the project. But our goal is to create a platform that brings materials-focused research methodologies to the broader community. So to students, to faculty, and then even people outside of VCU. So we are right now, this is a sort of snapshot. We're developing a website called Material Being. It will not have that font. We will be changing the font. But it's in progress. It's in the early stages. But the website will be called Material Being. And again, this is somewhere that researchers, faculty, students, anyone, homeowners, community members, anyone could come here and perhaps find information about materials research. Some things might be the materials of the home. I have a slide about that in a moment. Others might be kind of higher, kind of zoomed out, kind of bigger picture views of materials focused research. So to give you a couple of examples of research that we're doing right now, this is one of our students. We have faculty researchers and student researchers that are involved in this project. So it's been really fun to involve a lot of our students that are very excited. One of our students, she's a sculpture major. She went to Vermont this summer and spent 2 months at this quarry and at a studio nearby to study not just using stone in her work, but also how it is extracted, to better understand the craft of working with stone, and then also to develop her own work. So we describe this as embodied research, meaning researching as a sensory being, engaging physically, emotionally, and spiritually with the processes, places, and histories of stone. So these were 2 projects that she worked on. On the left, this is titled Viewfinder, and you can see how she's kind of holding it up and then seeing the sun through the opening or the top circle. And that is made out of marble. And then on the right, this she has titled Stone Skin, and this is dolomite and wire. So this is a project called the Eggshell Project. And so thinking about the materiality of home, and if we think of waste as resource, how can we look at what we are generating in our own homes as resources? So we're all familiar with composting, recycling. These are very familiar terms and processes. But how do we even kind of beyond that expand what we think of as a resource in terms of the waste that we're generating? So my studio and I, over the past few years, I think we have eaten an unhealthy number of eggs. So we've gathered a lot of eggs over the past 2 years, or eggshells, I should say. And then we wash them, and then we've manipulated them in a number of different ways to see what kinds of materials we can create with them. So on the left, this is just one of many examples of research of material that students were bringing in. On the bottom, you see how we start with a more complete eggshell, and then gradually we're breaking it down. So the potential of eggshell-based bioplastic suggests a compelling alternative for eco-friendly packaging material. So incorporating minuscule eggshell fragments into bioplastic introduces a pioneering biodegradable packaging solution. Eggshells are porous, they're lightweight in nature, they have a high composition of calcium carbonate, an easily degradable natural compound. On the bottom, what you're seeing is this is actually taking those eggshells and then putting them into a blender and getting them as close to like a powder as we could. So part of our assessment of what is the potential of this material or this waste or this resource, however we want to describe it, is also an assessment of the role that it plays. What is it? So what is an eggshell? So we've done color analyses. At one point, we had identified over 50 different shades, from sort of a bright white to a very dark brown to blue to gray. So we have conversations in studio about, is it like sand? Is it like soil? Is it like clay? Also, there's a little sketch there that one of my students did of a little bird. We've talked about, do you think of it as worthless? Like if you think of it as trash, it might be considered as worthless, but it's a home. It's protective. Is it trash? There's all these different ways that we can think of it. So part of the notion of if we're working towards a more circular economy is challenging beliefs that we have about the value that different things hold. Here, these are some of the experiments. So this particular student was exploring combining eggshell with clay to see how does the eggshell interact with a clay material. One of the problems was that as the clay dried and as the moisture left the clay, there wasn't as much to bind or to hold. And so embedding and actually putting the eggshell further into the clay required us to sometimes introduce a third element. And then starting to think about, so I can make this new material. So what? What's the purpose of that? And so on the right, you see, again, that same student was sketching, imagining maybe it becomes a bowl for her next round of eggs. So the material index, those are just 2 examples, the student who was working with stone and then the project that has to do with eggshells. There are a number of other projects that are occurring under the material index project umbrella. We have a project here that's very briefly summarized summarized through the business school. So they're looking at supply chain, operations, analytics. We have students, faculty in the humanities and sciences. They might be looking at materials in production and how that is also material in relation. In the sculpture department, they're looking at how they can create physical catalogs of material possibilities. So this is actually a photo from a station that they have in the sculpture department at VCU, where students are encouraged to experiment and create physical samples. And then there's a QR code that they attach on this keychain or on this chain with the material so that other students can come up. They can actually have a tactile experience with this material, like this bioplastic here, which is very squishy. And then they're able to not only have that tactile experience, but they can follow the QR code and learn a bit more. So in the arts, as I mentioned, the eggshell project is one example. And then in engineering, there are a number of different project types that are happening. One of them is the use of primers on wood gardening products. So in conclusion, with the materials index project, these are just some of the students and faculty that have been involved with this project. But the notion is, by bringing together all of these different disciplines, what we're starting to do is think of this as a problem that we all share, but that we can all solve, and not really relegated to a particular discipline to solve it, but more so, how can we share that work? And with that, I will hand it over to Radhika.
Thank you, Emily. So, all right. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone on Zoom hear me? Okay. All right. Perfect. All right. So thank you, Emily. And good evening, everyone. So I'm Radhika Barua, as has been mentioned multiple times this evening. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Engineering at VCU. And here we think of design and materials in a very similar very fashion to that of VCU School of Arts, but in a slightly different fashion too. So we're more solution driven, more technology driven. So we also do human-centered design. We also work with prototypes, but our prototypes are driven to solve a particular problem. And problems as defined by the United Nations Sustainability Development Goals. So within the College of Engineering, we are mostly focused on affordable energy, which is goal 7, on energy and infrastructure, which is goal 9, and sustainable cities, which is goal 11. And we work oftentimes in partnership with academic institutions, national labs, as well as industries across the world. So in comparison to most of VCU, we are a relatively young college, established only in 1993. We have at the current time around 2,000 undergraduate and 300 graduate students. And despite the fact that we're not really that old, we are a R1 research institution, which means that we have a research spending of over 500 million per year. And we achieve this mainly because we are so focused on research, and every student that circulates through our program is expected to have a hands-on experience working in the lab. So here's a couple of examples of the initiatives we have in place for that. We want to develop a workforce that is driven towards practicum knowledge. And so we have the vertically integrated program, which is actually also now a part of the VCU School of Arts. And this is essentially a credit-bearing multi-semester program, which means that students who enroll in it are supposed to work with the faculty for about 3 semesters, and they'll gain in-depth knowledge in a technology field that interests them. Diversity and inclusion is of importance to the College of Engineering. We have the first generation student success research program where underrepresented students are given a stipend to work with the research faculty over the course of the semester. All students are expected to do a co-op program, an internship, and definitely they go through the senior capstone design experience in their final year of study. And more often than not, these are in collaboration with national labs and industry. Now, many of our research faculty, at least 12 that I can think of, are focused on sustainability-focused research and building from the concept of the material index. For us, materials mean in something different. We are more focused on critical materials. And if critical materials is a new term for you, note that these are the building blocks of clean energy technologies. These are indispensable for energy conversion, production, transmission, as well as storage. So in this slide over here, I show the criticality matrix. So on the x-axis, what we have over here is supply risk. And on the y-axis, we have importance to energy. And so the Department of Energy basically has identified 50 materials that are deemed as critical. And these are concentrated here in this block that is marked in red. Now it is projected that as we go into the future towards 2030, because the US has aggressive goals to decarbonize by 2030, this red block over here will be populated even more. And this is expected because with the uptake of renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles. Of importance to us mostly with respect to this red quadrant over here are the rare earth elements, which are essentially elements which are, if you look at the periodic table, the ones at the very bottom. They're rare, not because they are scarce, but because they are also associated with a complicated legacy when it comes to mining. So rare earths, so these are not very pretty pictures, as you can see over here. And rare earths are mined by digging vast open pits in the ground. And if not done correctly, they can result in wastewater ponds that are filled with acids, heavy metals, and in extreme cases, even with radioactive materials. And the story is even more interesting because rare earths, despite its name, are not really rare. Most of the reserves are concentrated in the Baotao Plateau in China. And most of the mining at the current time also happens there. So as of 2018, China was responsible for around 120,000 megatons of rare earth mining. And the United States was third in this list, but their production or the amount of rare earths mined was 1/8 of the amount. And there's only one mine in the United States that actually contains, and which is where rare earths are actively mined currently, and this is the Molycorp, the Mountain Pass mine in California. But the story doesn't really end there because mining is just half the job, or it's basically just the starting process. Once the ore is mined, it has to be concentrated, separated, processed, and refined. And all of these steps happen in the eastern part of the world. So what the United States does is we get the materials, ship it all the way to China, the material is processed, and then it is shipped all the way back to the United States to be deployed in renewable energy technologies and electric vehicles, which actually make a difference. Imagine the carbon footprint of the transportation process as we're going across the Atlantic. It's immense. And this has significant effect in the clean energy industry. So the rare earths are critical components, and its biggest market lies in the magnet industry. So permanent magnet is the magnet that once magnetized is always magnetized. So it creates its own persistent magnetic field and it retains its properties. These are what make electric vehicles and wind turbines so great. And now as the DOE is pushing towards 100% clean electricity by 2035, and has pledged to encourage 50% EV adoption by 2030, the question arises, where are all these rare earths? And do we really have the capacity to get to these aggressive goals? And this is where some of the research that I do in my group comes in. So we are the Advanced Magnetic Materials Research Group at VCU. And in order to enable the magnet supply chain, we have three thrusts in our research group. One We make rare earth magnets from domestic resources that are easily available. 2, we enable new manufacturing methods that are associated with low carbon footprint. And 3, we seek to improve recycling of rare earth magnets that are already out there. So the amount of neodymium or samarium or any of the rare earths that are mined are kept within the economy for as long as possible without going to the landfill. But remember, recycling is the last line of defense. We do not want to recycle because recycling costs energy. And so, keeping the design cycle in mind, we want to make sure that we start right from the beginning. If we can do away without the critical materials, wouldn't that be great? And so that's our objective, and that's where we should begin with. And to get to that stage, we try to use design strategies inspired by nature wherever possible. And by nature, I mean, there's a big term out there called biomimicry. But what we do in our research group is we borrow concepts from outer space. So in this slide over here, I show an example where we seek to make or fabricate domestic magnets inspired by nature. What you see in this slide over here is a slice of a tetrad of an NWA meteorite, where NWA stands for Northwest Africa. And this meteorite, believe it or not, is magnetic in nature. Just found in 2000, and it surprised us quite a bit. And then it was found that it's not really that surprising because a large amount, chemically, if you look at the composition, this meteorite has a large amount of iron and nickel. Now, where else do we have iron nickel? Our Earth's core is made of iron nickel. And that is what makes the planet Earth such a great, big, huge magnet. We have a North Pole and a South Pole when you think of it. But then, it's not really that easy if you take iron and nickel and you mix it up and you melt it, you're not going to just end up with a magnet. And that's because when you make iron nickel alloy in equilibrium, in normal conditions, it would have a structure that kind of looks like this, where the iron and the nickel would just sit somewhere within the crystal structure very happily, but it wouldn't have any net magnetization associated with it. To make iron nickel magnetic, you have to design the material just right at the very atomic scale so you can get iron and nickel to sit in a layered ordered structure, such as like the one you're seeing over here. And that's what makes it magnetic. Now, in nature, this doesn't really exist. Iron nickel is magnetic in meteorites only because it is subjected to extraordinarily low cooling rates, around 0.3 Kelvin per million years. Now, that would be impossible to do. But then, not unachievable. Diamond is essentially just carbon. It is formed under the Earth's crust under very special conditions of temperature and pressure. And they were rare and very rare until we discovered, is the charger not working here? Because it shows low battery. Okay, I'll keep going just in case we get disconnected. And so what we're basically trying to do is make synthetic magnets in the lab, just like we have zirconia out there. And so that's our end goal. And so here's my graduate student, Anthony Duong, working on a project in collaboration with Ames Lab and Northeastern University. And this project is funded by the US Department of Energy. Another example of how we incorporate sustainable design principles into our research is can be obtained if you look at the magnet manufacturing process itself. So here's a schematic of what it takes to make a good permanent magnet after it is refined and brought back to the United States from China. It's 16 steps. Magnets are shaped into a right form, that is into motors. At very high temperatures, very special conditions, using very high magnetic fields for prolonged periods. It is an energy-intensive process. And so we seek to reduce the carbon footprint of the manufacturing process. So here's my student, Omar Bishop, And his graduate project, which is funded by NSF and conducted in collaboration with the Commonwealth Center of Advanced Manufacturing, which is located not very far from here, he seeks to make magnets using additive manufacturing. So additive manufacturing is a rather new and disruptive technology where materials, instead of you taking a big chunk of material and drilling holes into it or subtracting material in order to shape it into the right form, what he essentially does is he uses technologies to build the part energy innovation, that these micro-credential courses can also be used to serve as a reskilling tools for professionals who are already in industry right now. And so what enables us to do this is VCU has partnered with Pearson Credly. And for students and participants of these courses, they will get continuing education points as well as they are called as CUPs or digital batches. So digital batches are basically batches that have some metadata within that they can include in, say, like Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn. LinkedIn is actually the way to go. To prove to their employers that they actually have the credentials to understand sustainability or sustainability concepts. We want sustainability to be a mindset. When a student leaves VCU, they should know about the design concepts. And in everything they do and touch, they have to think, where is the material coming from? What is it doing? And what is the end of life scenario? How can I keep it in the economy for as long as possible? And so with that, I will end. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer it. Thank you. I think that is fine. Yeah.
To log back in.
So there's a real serious problem here with the use or abuse of the terms sustainability and circularity. Because I'm very involved in issues related to plastic. I'm not an expert, okay? And the entire plastic industry is misrepresenting the issue of circularity. They use the term all the time, and all they're trying to do is continue to extract oil and
Absolutely, I agree.
turn it into plastic and then burn it,
Mhm.
okay? Which is just the same as if you burn right out of the ground, except you got plastic for a while. So I mean, the entire industry is using those terms, sustainability and circularity, with abandon, okay? And so I would hope that faculty members like yourselves would push back against that misuse of terms, because I've been in meetings with the plastic industry where they keep talking about the circular economy, and there's nothing circular about what they're doing at all.
No, there isn't, and I agree. I agree, there isn't, and you have to, I don't think the plastic industry is keeping in mind, there's a lot of talk about like biofuels too, but where is the biofuel coming from? Is it coming from a crop that will actually, it'll eat into the food industry? It's something to think about. So, and it's this mindset that we want students to know. And so in the class that I teach, and this is a class that is supported by the Venture World Foundation, that's the sort of mindset we want to do. So we have topics such as these, and we ask them to think, and that is the whole point of the material index. We want them to know where is it coming from and where is it going? What are the risks associated with it? What is the carbon footprint associated with it? From the time we make it to the time we mine it, to the time we make it, and make it into a useful product. And it's really very interesting. So let's say magnets, for instance. I actually skipped over a lot of things when I said recycling magnets. We don't have the slides up here, but when we take the magnets, so how are magnets used in hard disks? They're included there with the steel and the plastic, and it is not really easy to get the rails or the magnets out and separate them from the casing. So there's a lot of thought, and that's an energy intensive process. There's a lot of thought that goes into it. A lot of plastic is wasted, a lot of magnet is wasted. And so we have to think, and we have to make the students think about that. So if they incorporate this principle so design for recycle is actually a thing. And they have to think about how are we going to recycle it? Should I even put my motor in that bracket in the hard disk? That's important.
I have something to, just thinking about what you're describing there, greenwashing could be a term that comes to mind. And when I think back to, I remember back in the early 2000s, I was working with an architecture firm in Seattle for a while, and there were a couple of major carpet manufacturers that are based here in the United States. And they had come out with these new, what they called reclamation programs. So the idea was you could purchase carpet from them if it's down, let's say for 10 years, 8 years, something like that. And then what they call uglies out. It's not that it's a failure of the material, but it has worn in a way that people don't like it anymore, which in architecture and design, this is happening all the time, right? But so there was this huge marketing push for several years with these reclamation programs. It's the way of the future. The problem, one of the many problems, was to your point about plastics. So the burden, let's say it's on a business owner. They have put this carpet down after 8 years. Okay, great. I'm going to send it back. The maker of this carpet will reclaim it. And then I get a credit that I can use to buy carpet from them, new carpet, at a discount. But the carpet manufacturers, they weren't paying for the demo and demolition. The most efficient way to demo is they just go in and they just knock it all down. And it is not a sensitive process. There's a lot of just, it all goes into the landfill, right? So you had this reclamation program that was being touted, but nobody's using it because the cost and the burden fell to the owner. And if they, 8 years later, if the same ownership was even in place, are they going to want to spend the extra money because they're getting a credit, but in the end it's costing them more because they have to pay for this extra process to send the carpet back. So there are these flaws in the
Well,
system,
market failures.
right?
Mhm.
I mean, we have all this embedded carbon in buildings, except we tear these buildings down instead of rehabbing, because. And there's some places, I know in France, there's some architects who are really putting a lot of emphasis on using existing buildings rather than tearing them down.
Yeah.
A lot of work, they repurpose buildings. We just blow them up and tear them down and then send it to the landfill, and that's all embedded carbon. The cement, steel, that, some of the stuff gets recycled, most of it goes. in.
Adaptive reuse is definitely one of the most sustainable things that we can do.
I've found
Absolutely.
in our research and in our work together too, during the material index that, and we're guilty of that too, and I'm working towards it. We don't really think about the circular economy models and to understand what a circular business model means. And so, so for the micro-credential courses that we are designing, we have a partner who's not here today. He's from the VCU School of Business. And so as an assessment, we have a tool that we have developed. I don't know if anybody here is familiar with the business model canvas. So any startup or an entrepreneur, before they start their business, they have to do a customer discovery program where they look at the value proposition. So this canvas is designed to have them think about what will prevent their idea or the technology from actually becoming a circular business model, to help them identify in the long run, we're not there yet, but in the long run, I'm hoping that it will help them identify some of the bottlenecks. And then once we've identified those, it will drive them to, find the solution towards it. But they have to think about it right from the beginning. There's a lot of thrust in it. For instance, the Department of Energy. And so the certification, the Certificate in Energy Innovation that Dominion Energy is putting together, they have this structure built into them. And so they have, so for any new entrepreneur, they have mandated courses. So any new startup who works in the dairy space is now supposed to learn how to do carbon accounting in their manufacturing process. And so for this, they use a tool that the Argonne National Labs has come up with, and it's called GREET. It's not, as Emily just mentioned, it's not a very popular tool. Nobody is using it, but it's out there. And it takes a certain policy or a certain, when DOE has to come, this is compulsory, you have to do it. And that's when people will start taking notice. And so there are tools out there. You just have to get there.
Put a price on the carbon.
Put the price on the carbon. Yes, absolutely. Any other questions?
So something, man, I'm a civil engineer, and something like 15 years ago, they decided to use less oil in making asphalt. When they did that, they cut the design life in half. So over 10 years, you're actually using the same amount of asphalt. But because of having to change it, they have to mill the material down, end up with all this aggregate material, which is supposed to be recycled, but they're never recycling it. Because the ports will have to shut down if you did that. So, we're wasting all this material, all this energy, just because of one regulation, of cutting the amount of oil. So.
Yeah, and the more discussion we have about these topics with the students who will be the next generation, I think the more poised they will be. So workforce development is big at VCU. We want them to have that sustainability mindset when they get out of school.
I think there's also, I had this conversation recently. I'm trying to work with our facilities group at VCU to understand how much waste we're generating. But we contract out our cleaning services and our recycling services, and measuring it, quantifying it is proving to be challenging. And it's hard to get people excited about. It's not exactly the sexiest topic. So it isn't getting a lot of traction, but it's important for us to understand like how much we're generating and what type of waste we're generating. And so I think about how if we don't understand what we need, then we're just constantly in a mode of producing without any real way of assessing, is it too much or is it enough? And so being able to understand, like, how do you define what you need? And especially within big organizations, I've always worked for design. I've been at VCU for 10 years now, and it's the biggest organization I've ever worked for. It's very hard for me sometimes because I just want to go talk to who makes the decision. And it's such a big entity. But I think that these big entities can sometimes breed a bit of apathy and a lack of accountability. And so slowing down or getting people to slow down to have conversations about like, what do we need? Are we just producing and buying more, taking more? And then we find ourselves with waste or extra because we don't really know to begin with what we need.
And so there's a lot of trust in also helping them to understand it and then to quantitate it. So how do you quantitate sustainability? And that's, to understand concepts like measuring embodied energy or measuring carbon. And because it's the numbers which will make a difference. A lot of organizations talk numbers, any business will talk numbers. So we give them the tools and the figures of merit to understand how to quantitate sustainability too. I think in engineering, that's a big focus.
So in Europe, there's a concept that is much more prevalent called enhanced producer responsibility. Basically, if you make the producer take it back, okay, then they have to bear that cost. And so they're much more inclined, presumably, to design products that can be easily recycled because they're stuck with the problem. I mean, just like alkaline batteries, I mean, you can't recycle those things. You end up throwing them in landfill, and they tell you that you get messages on lots of stuff you buy saying, please dispose of responsibly, which is just total baloney because there is no way to dispose of responsibly. Nobody takes it. And so, there are laws in some countries, particularly in Europe right now, with regard to enhanced producer responsibility, where if you make it, you gotta take it back. All including rare earths and other elements that go into making a television set, right? You gotta take a TV set back. You may figure out a way to design it so that you can pull that stuff back out.
Yeah, and
Our country has to do that.
yeah, life cycle analysis is like it's a big tool for sustainability. In Europe, it's mandated. In the United States, industries don't exactly, it's up to them whether they want to do it. So that's a mindset change that we need. And so we do teach open LCA and LCA tools too, and it's going to be a part of the micro-credential books too. And we want everyone to know that these resources exist.
Could you say some more about what the IEEE is?
ISEE. Do you want to go this one? Or
Sure, yes.
Sorry.
The ISEE, Institute for Sustainable Energy and Environment. It's an entity within the university that is separate from any of the colleges or the departments. It's more closely related to the Humanities Research Center, which is another entity at the university, but it's more independent. And so it allows and supports transdisciplinary efforts that are meant to bring together faculty researchers, student researchers from all sorts of different departments and colleges on environmentally focused research, things that have to do with sustainability, energy, and the environment.
So if you go to the website of ICE, we have 4 research thrusts, education and outreach is big. The 4 research thrusts include carbon capture and renewable energy technologies, which is batteries. We're at the cusp of launching a project which are focused on data centers, and it's called data ecologies, where we're looking at the carbon footprint that computing power needs, which is something that people don't talk about a lot, but it is of concern. So these are the sort of questions that we explore. So in October of this year, the ISC will have its 2nd annual symposium. And at that point of time, I will reach out to the Sierra Club and invite you. And it's a 2-day event. We will have experts from all over the country come in, from national labs, from universities, from the government, to come and discuss issues related to sustainability and with the technology focus, but there will be some outreach and education initiatives discussed too. So I'll make it a point. Yeah.
One question, I'm just wondering if the funding for some of your grants and things is primarily coming from industry groups and things like that, looking for help and assistance in what they're doing, or more from government agencies coming from that side of it, trying to hopefully get the industry to do things. Just who seems to be more interested in making progress in the area, or is it both?
Well, with the Biden administration right now, there's a lot of government trust. So there's a lot of NSF funding available. There's a lot of DOE, Department of Energy funding available. DOD, and they will be there at the symposium too. They also do environmentally focused research, although when you look online and media, it doesn't seem to be the case, but they do it. There is industry also, so I do have industrial collaborations, particularly in the manufacturing sector. Now, there are NGOs like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Lemonson Foundation, and the Virtual Foundation who do fund research universities. But most of the money that comes from them, and the funding that comes from them, are focused on fostering an entrepreneurial ecosystem so that the amount of money is lesser. And it is mostly meant to launch startups let's put it this way. The federal funding is for fundamental research. The industry funding is for translational research. And the money that comes from the NGOs is for workforce development. And so, yeah, and so the commensurate amounts come in, but everyone is vested in it. We just have to know the right people. Yeah.
I understand the rare earths in China are kind of a side product of processing for another primary mineral, and only China has enough demand for that primary mineral to make it worthwhile to process before for the rare earths, which is why we send our stuff there for China for processing.
It's a little bit more complicated than that. So if you look at the periodic table, the bottom row are the rare earths. So they have terbium, neodymium, samarium, and so on. They're called rare earths and they're difficult to process. Now, I don't want to go into too much chemistry, but they are very similar in terms, so they're big atoms and they're just one atomic number away. They're very hard to separate. So when you mine them, so if you're mining rare earths, you're going to mine neodymium, samarium, cerium, lanthanum all together. And then you have to process and refine and separate them because you don't want to use them all together in the end product that you're doing. And that's where the difficulty happens. Now, so I don't want to get political over here. But somewhere along the line, the United States has lost a lot of the technology to process and refine ores economically, in an economically viable fashion. And therefore, our reliance on China. But there is a thrust, and I don't do it personally, but I know people at VCU, particularly in the chemical engineering department, where they are working on developing technologies for rare earth processing and refining. Now, as for the side product, it's very interesting now. And again, a little bit more chemistry. So if you have neodymium, dysprosium, and lanthanum all put together, so it's a wort that you get out from the mine, you can, in order to mine the neo, you have to mine the lanthanum, but lanthanum is not that useful. So we come up with, and that's the side product that you're talking about. So in the Department of Energy, there's also thrust as to see, so when we mine the neo, we're getting the lanthanum, what can we do with the lanthanum? Since they're so atomically and so in a chemistry, and by virtue of the chemistry, so similar to each other, can we tweak? So this goes with my thrust, one of my research, can we make rare earth free or, more, or basically neo-dysprosium and terbium free magnets, there's a lot of side products. Cerium is available and plentiful and we don't know what to do with it, but what if we can use it for a disruptive technology too? So there is a lot of funding from DOE for that kind of work too. And it is hopefully sometime in the future, we'll have solved the problem.
Thank you very much. Thank you both for being here tonight, and we will ask you, we offer a stipend $50 to each of our speakers to designate an organization to receive a $50 contribution from us. So we will be in touch about finalizing that. And at this time, we're going to have a few announcements, and I'd like to start by inviting Glenn Bessa up to talk about, many of us know Glenn Bessa for the wide variety of his work with the Sierra Club, but his most recent incarnation is as one of the co-founders of the Friends of Chesterfield, which is involved in trying to bring to a halt the proposed gas power plant that Dominion would like to build there. So Glenn.
Hi there. So a lot of you know that in 2020, the Virginia State Legislature passed a law called the Virginia Clean Economy Act. And Dominion was involved in the negotiation of that, and they committed to reaching net zero by 2045. That was a negotiation that involved a Democratic governor and a Democratic legislature. Now that we have a Republican governor who doesn't care about climate change and who basically wants an all of the above approach, Dominion has changed their tune now and has proposed, instead of reducing their greenhouse gas emissions, instead they want to double the greenhouse gas emissions, even though the law has an expectation that they would reduce them to net zero. So they basically flaunting the law. They don't care what the law says. And, you know, this is environmental regulation has no particular penalties. So the problem we have is the first manifestation of this of ignoring the law is the development of a new gas-fired power plant in Chesterfield County, 1,000 megawatts that they want to build where the old coal plant was. Okay. And so there's a lot of people coming together. The entire environmental community really is united in opposing this. And we really needed some grassroots efforts too. So we created a group called Friends of Chesterfield County. If you live in Chesterfield, do you live in Chesterfield? Chesterfield? Okay, yeah, we talked to you already. Thank you. And even if you don't, it's important to let legislators know. So in any case, what's going on right now is the first step in approving this gas plant would be the zoning associated with it, because they need a conditional use zoning approval from Chesterfield County. So if we can stop that zoning, it will set them back. They also have to get an air permit from DEQ. They have to get approval from the State Corporation Commission so they can send us the bill for building this thing. But the easiest way to stop this thing is to stop the zoning. So they filed the application just recently, about a week and a half ago. It probably will be voted on by the Planning Commission at their March meeting and by the Board of Supervisors at their April or May meeting. I know I'm giving you more information than you need. But what's important is that this Thursday from 3:30 to 5:30, if you are available, we've got a drop-by meeting at the Meadowdale Library, and I can give you the information. I have a flyer here. Just see me, I'll give you the flyer. And we're going to catch people up on what's going on. So this Thursday, the 15th, 3:30 to 5:30, Meadowdale Library. See me, I've got a flyer with the details. More significant, I think, than that, where we're trying to talk to our folks is Senator Hashmi, who is a good friend of the environment, is having a town hall meeting on Sunday, February 25th at 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock. And at that town hall meeting, she has invited Dominion Energy and the Friends of Chesterfield and other environmental groups, each of which will have 15 minutes. So 15 minutes for the proponents and 15 minutes for the opponents and 30 minutes of questions. So it'll be very tightly confined. We're going to try to turn out a crowd for that. So you will get emails. It'll be on our Facebook page. So just watch for these opportunities to weigh in. And thank Senator Hashmi and thank your legislators and help us get the word out, because this is not just a Chesterfield County issue. The Clean Economy Act and climate change, of course, Clean Economy Act impacts all of Virginia, and the climate affects all of us. And if Dominion is just one example of a major utility that's going to completely ignore the law and say we will double our emissions, double their emissions. Those are not numbers I'm making up. I can tell you what their emissions are and what their emissions will be if you'd like to know. It's expressed in metric tons. Sorry it took so long. I got more information here.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm going to briefly mention a few upcoming events. We have 2 hikes coming up. One is on Saturday, February 24th at Cumberland Marsh. This is a fairly advanced hike. And the other one is on March 9th at the Pony Pasture. This is a anyone welcome hike. Beginners, anybody, a lovely walk around the Pony Pasture. Then our next program meeting here in this space will be on Tuesday, March 12th, where we will hear from our own Lee Williams. Yes. Who did a large amount to make the Zoom aspect of tonight possible. Lee will be presenting on the group Beyond Methane and their work to try to bring Richmond Gas Works to some accountability. And then also I'll mention that our April meeting will also be here with a representative of the Nottoway tribe. So please be here, mark your calendars to join us on the second Tuesdays in March and April in this space, and enjoy these hikes if you can, if you would like to. I'd like to thank Congregation ORME for hosting us since last September in this very warm and welcoming space. I would like to thank Nancy Patterson, who brings the refreshments at each of these meetings and coordinates those. And if you would like to get our newsletter in beautiful real color, please sign the sheet at the back of the room. And we also have petitions at the back of the room about the Chesterfield gas plant. If you would be so inclined as to sign one of those too, that would be great. So thank you all for coming out tonight, Mardi Gras. And it looks like we have step up to the mic. We have another announcement coming.
But, so anyone that would like to zoom in on, Wednesday, February the 21st at 7 o'clock, you get to get an update on what happened, what is still going on in the General Assembly, what bills are still alive. Maybe not too many, but there might be a few that we'd like to weigh in on. So, you can find that information easily on their website, the Paul's the James website, it's got that. And also on the Virginia chapter events calendar on Wednesday, February the 21st on Zoom. Connor Kish, he's the director for the Sierra Club, will be doing an update along with Bob Chippy. And I think you might know them both. Thank you.
Yes, informational session about the General Assembly presented by Tyler Madison and her York River Group, another local group of Sierra Club. One other thing I'd like to mention, there is a film which won the local film contest in the RVA Environmental Film Festival several years ago called Headwaters Down. And that was a documentary about 5 guys traveling from the headwaters of the James River down to Richmond. They have now made a sequel to that about traveling from Richmond to the Bay, and that will be shown at the Berg Theater on February 27th. February 27th, Headwaters Down, Tidal River is the title of that one. All right, once again, up, Emily.
Sure. There's interest with the group. There's a VCU faculty member out of the VCU Qatar campus who is researching bamboo. And there are a couple of films, I can send you all the links if you want to share those, that are focused on bamboo. One is called Bamboo Tradition of the Future. And then the other one, I can't remember the name, but I can send you the links. They're free and you can find them on YouTube. But they're really interesting. And he has come to Richmond several times and he's likely to be here in the spring and he gives free talks. And so I'm also happy to share that if there's interest.
She's using bamboo for like fabric and for construction and all kinds of things, is that
Primarily for architecture.
architecture?
Yeah.
All kinds of interesting things going on. Thank you very much again, and we will see you soon.
We're such a trooper. I'm sorry.